The human animal isn't doing well in the modern world. We have become domesticated and have lost our wildness. The Human Animal Show explores a return to a state of wild health, our original, authentic human animal. And now your hosts, Frank Forensich and Dr. Rodney King.
Hello there.
Hey, Peter.
Hi,
Hello.
Peter.
Hello.
So,
Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you, and thanks for joining us. Myself and Frank really appreciate it.
Great. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I heard a lot about you, Rodney, from Christian. So who's so excited by all the stuff you do. So yeah.
Well, hopefully it was good things you heard from him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He holds you in very high esteem. I know.
Fantastic. Well, Christian's been amazing. I mean, I've known him. Oh, geez, I've lost count. It's been a long time. And I would really put him in as one of my early mentors, and definitely gave me the courage to kind of get out there and do stuff. And so, yeah, I owe him big time.
Great.
So, Peter, normally what we do on the show, right, we kind of like have this like preamble. It's our thesis. Basically, you know, this is the state of the world. The world's going to shit, right? But at the end of the day, I don't think I even have to read it, because I guess, you know, like a lot of people have read your new book, and it's a hard read, right? If you think about what you're actually putting forward there.
Yeah. It is, yes.
And so I guess that would be a good starting point. The book is, for those who don't know, it's Forgiving Humanity. And I thought maybe a good starting point would be if you could just kind of give us a brief overview of the thesis of the book before we quiz you a little bit on and have some questions for you.
Yes. Yeah, a brief overview is hard because, I mean, in the book, I condensed it down to...
I know.
I wanted the book short, really short, because I know people don't have a lot of time. So I really condensed all the arguments down, so it's pretty dense. And it is, as you say, a hard read. It is a hard read. My other books have been more, people say more optimistic. I think I've always tried to be realistic. I just felt for years I've had this thing about how we are looking at the future and how we do not take accelerating change into account when we look at the future. We look at the future hundreds, thousands of years ahead, you know, and we sort of unconsciously think in linear change. If this much change has happened in the last 100 years, then similar amounts of change will happen in the next 100, maybe a bit more. We know things are going faster, but we don't realize how much faster they're going. And I've been interested in exponential change right back from when I was, you know, a mathematician and first came across it. Because the thing about exponential change is not only it gets faster and faster, because of the way it's multiplying, it reaches completely unimaginable rates of change very, very fast. I mean, the whole thing, we know if you invest $1 at compound interest, 10% compound interest, after 50 years, it's worth $117, and after 100 years, it's worth, I think, 13,000. Things just escalate like that. And what I see is the future is the same way. And the reason our development escalates in an exponential way is because, as I term it, innovation breeds innovation. The more, you know, technological advances means that we can do different scientific experiments, which means we can have more knowledge, which means we can do, you know, do better technologies, make better technologies. So the whole thing is feeding back on itself. And whenever you get positive feedback, you get exponential growth. And that's what's happening in interest in a bank. And people talk about this, things are getting faster, but we don't realize what the exponential curve means. And it means that if we follow this thing of getting faster and faster, because innovation is breeding innovation, we're going to see ridiculous, well, almost unsustainable rates of change in just 10, 20, 30 years. It's going fast, particularly with artificial intelligence now coming online, where artificial intelligence will start designing even better artificial intelligence, where again, you've got this positive feedback loop of things getting faster and faster. Now, the sort of normal way that people look at it, the common way is, you know, but this is going to mean we're going to have unimaginable technology. And that's true. The technology that's going to be coming down the next 10 years alone is going to be almost unimaginable. 20 years after that, we've no idea where we'll be. And that's a sort of the positive side, which is going to be happening. But what we don't look at is the cost of exponential change, particularly on the environment. And if you look at most of what is going wrong, not all of it, but a lot of what is going wrong, the issues we're facing, the global crisis, a lot of it comes back to the fact of our exponential growth, where it's the exponential growth in consumption of resources or pollution that's also growing exponentially. All of this is really affecting the environment. I mean, climate change, for example, is a result of our escalating consumption of fossil fuels, burning oil and coal and putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere thousands of times faster than the planet can adapt to it.
Yeah.
And that's the side we don't look at. And when you look at that, the thesis I come to is that any technological civilization, and this is the bit that, you know, is a bit hard for people to accept, any technological civilization is actually short-lived, because sooner or later, the impact of this accelerating change on the environment starts creating just crises after crises. And, you know, we see we're possibly in the, you know, a sixth major mass extinction on Earth. And I'm not necessarily saying, you know, humans going to be extinct, but this civilization is going to collapse, I think. It's a global civilization collapsing. We've never had that before and don't know where it's going. And this is what I felt for a long time is something that I called our blind spot on the future. We always come back to thinking unconsciously in terms of linear change. We don't think in terms of exponentials. Our minds aren't used to it. We didn't evolve in an exponential world. And so that's the basic thesis I'm saying. And really looking at, okay, if that's what's happening, what can we do? I'm really saying it comes back to accepting that maybe things aren't going to turn out the way we want, but we have to learn to have greater inner resilience to cope with the changes and more compassion for people for what we're going through. And also seeing that, you know, in a way, there's also another side to look at this. You know, we are this incredible blossoming of consciousness in the cosmos, which happens, you know, maybe once in a planet's lifetime. And we are the most amazing beings. And maybe we have to let go of the fact that this amazing being should be here forever, just as we accept the fact that, you know, our own personal amazing being is not going to be here forever. But we celebrate ourselves as this amazing being, knowing that we're going to come to an end. Can we do the same with the species, except that we are this incredible species, capable of so much, and maybe we're just here for a brief flash of time?
So that's a really good overview. I was thinking as you were saying that, it's basically the way that you're describing it as this paradox of technology. But you know, technology, in some respects, we can say, well, the first time a human discovered that he could, for example, create a spear, use that spear to hunt an animal, realized that actually if he came together as a group and they all had spears, they could hunt an even bigger animal that they couldn't do on their own. That's kind of the start, you could say, of technology, right? Amongst other things, right? As an example. Yeah. I guess what my question is that, so technology has been around in some way, shape, or form since the dawn of mankind. Where was this kind of tipping point, do you think, where it now gets to the point where we have this exponential technological change that, in your words, is going to likely lead to the end of our civilization? Possibly. I guess, why were we okay for so long and now suddenly we're not? And it's in such a short period of time.
I don't think there was a tipping point. I think the thing is with exponential growth, it starts off looking very, very, very slow, and we don't sort of realize it's exponential. But I think you're right. It goes back to, I would say, the spear is probably one of the first things. And, you know, again, we were using tools, we're using maybe axes and things to create spears. I see technology as using tools to create better tools. And so, you know, even then, it's, you know, one of the bits of data we have is that some of the great mammals, the mammoths and things, started becoming extinct at the time we developed the spear. And so already there was some effect on the environment. And, you know, we went on, you know, we developed fire, but then agriculture. It came a lot later, but agriculture was like 10 to 20,000 years ago. And that started having an effect on the land, on the soil, and it in a way began the movement into cities, which happened a lot faster. And then, civilizations, the first civilizations, maybe 2,500 years ago, maybe more in China. And that's been speeding up. And then the Industrial Revolution was only 250 years it began. And the Information Revolution, probably 50 years. So this speeding up has been there all along, but we never really saw it until today. We never saw the impact today. I mean, after the Industrial Revolution, we began to see accelerating progress. We realized things were beginning to grow faster. And so it's been there all along. To me, there wasn't a tipping point. We are now at a time where the implications of that, the ramifications, are beginning to become obvious in our own lifetime.
I'm wondering if, like, also just you were talking about agriculture, which then changed the landscape in a lot of ways, where now suddenly you were able to feed a lot more people. And so coming out of that, and plus obviously the advances at the time, there was a population explosion. And that's also relatively recent. And I wonder how much of that has actually played also into technology, in a sense, speeding up. The more people we have, it seems, the more technology we seem to need.
Yes, absolutely. All of it's playing back into itself the whole time. Yes, and technology, things like, having metal plows really promoted agriculture, things like that. So yes, and population exploded because we were healthier and, could build better homes and things for ourselves. And then later, improve sanitation. So all the time we've been using technology to improve, health, which has promoted the population growth. And as we've got more comfortable in our lifetime, we're able to sit back and begin to contemplate the universe more and become scientists. So I think it's all feeding back on itself the whole time.
Frank?
I'm curious about the linkage between this acceleration, this exponential change, and stress and mental health, because it seems like we are reaching the limits of our ability to cope with change.
Absolutely. Yes. And in fact, at that point in the book, we usually define stress as a failure to adapt to change. Change is coming so fast we can't adapt. And I see that in today's world. As things get faster, there's more and more things we have to learn, take care of, adapt to. There's more changes that are coming, more software updates, whatever it is, more new technologies. And people are having to, in all of this, we're not moving into the leisure society. People are having to sort of expected to work harder and then keep up with Facebook and everything else. And yes, that's why people are talking about burnout becoming more and more prevalent in various industries. And, as we know, the effect of stress on our health, this has been known, for a number of years now, that many of our health complaints underlying them is stress, either the cause or stress is exacerbating the situation. So yes, we are, as individuals, becoming under increasing stress. And I think most of us are doing that. It's like we're so enmeshed in this growth, this acceleration, we can't step back. We have to sort of try to keep up with it in order to survive these days.
Yeah, that's a really good point about just having to survive. Because I was thinking as well, like the way that I would just frame this is what we're talking about is this dominant worldview, our modern dominant worldview. And I always find it fascinating that when you suggest to somebody that, the reason why you're feeling so bad, the reason why you're struggling so much is not that there's something inherently wrong with you, but there's something inherently wrong with the system that we're living in. And that's the thing that's causing the dysfunction, the psychological, emotional, and spiritual kind of sense of loss that you're feeling. But I find like there's always this resistance, right? Like people don't actually want to acknowledge what I'm saying is true. And I guess part of that is because it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't, right? That's kind of, I feel like how most people kind of sense this whole thing, that like, I'd rather just keep my head down and things will get better because everything's been promised, right? There's going to be better technology. Things are going to be better. But we've been hearing that ever since I don't know if you remember the Jetsons, right? That cartoon. If you look at the time frame for the Jetsons, it was roundabout now. We should be all in flying cars and everything should be great and robots should be doing everything for us. But as you keep noting, right, is that the more technology we have, the worse things actually seem to become.
Yes, the more there is. I mean, I remember, when computers first started coming on the scene, people talked about the leisure society. Computers are going to do all this work for us, they're going to take over stuff, and there's going to be massive unemployment because we wouldn't need secretaries anymore. And it's been the opposite. I mean, there's so much employment in the computer industry, but the leisure society, it's the opposite. We have less leisure. I mean, with friends, often look back to how things were, 30, 40 years ago, and it's like, wow, life was so much easier then, much less to worry about, to do. It was a much simpler life.
Yeah, so I'm thinking also, Peter, like as we're talking about this, just to kind of get a sense of the kind of what's happening on the ground. Let's say you're right, and I mean, our sense is that you're right. This is kind of what we're feeling. Myself and Frank, we talk about this all the time. But let's say this is the direction we're going, right? Where we have to, in essence, accept extinction. It's gonna happen. What do you think is gonna happen between now and then, between that time where this actually happens? What do you think is gonna happen on the ground? I mean, outside of climate change, I'm seeing a lot more violence, right? I mean, just look at in the recent time, just in the last 2 years. I mean, we've got wars popping up all over the place. I mean, is this something that's just going to basically just continue and just proliferate throughout the entire globe? I mean, what are we looking at here?
Yes, I think we're looking at a lot of things. Sadly, we may be looking at more wars. I agree, things have been proliferating in that respect, and some of that is over resources, scant resources. Whether we're fighting indirectly behind the scenes over oil or over water rights. So that the scarcity of resources is going to increase that, and also, I mean, migration. I don't think we've seen anything yet in terms of mass migration. When areas become uninhabitable, the only choice people have is to move. So that's going to be a problem. But I think also beyond that, it's like, how are people going to react? I think already there's a growing despair and despondency. I know friends of mine who are therapists saying, more and more clients are coming in not to try and sort out their marriage or their anxiety or depression, but like their angst about the future. They're coming in, they don't know what to do because they're so anxious about what's going to happen, or the future their children are coming into. It isn't the future we'd like them to have inherited. So I think there's going to be a growing despair, depression, anxiety psychologically. And that's why I think, now more than ever, we're going to need an inner development, an inner, what I call awakening of consciousness, to begin to deal with that in ourselves and not get so caught up in it. If we get caught up in that, we're just going to become more and more anxious, depressed, and we're going to see things are futile, which I think we have to move through that, and we have to help move through that. And in any grieving process of somebody, somebody we know dying, we go through a process, and in the end we come to acceptance of that. Okay, this has happened. And I think ultimately where we need to be coming to is an acceptance in ourselves. Okay, the future is not what I thought it was going to be, and can we accept that things are going to be very different? And that's one reason behind writing the book, was to, in a way, by showing underneath everything that's going wrong, what is there underneath, and that this is almost unavoidable, then maybe we can come to some greater acceptance of our situation.
So before we talk about that, because I think that's really important, I just want to go back to something you just said earlier, right in the beginning, Peter, which I think is really important. And to me, this is a very profound statement, and I think most people don't see it this way. When we look at most conflict, and this is something I heard, I don't know if you know Vandana Shiva talk about this, but she was talking about this, and she was saying that most of the time when we see conflict, we are told that it's a conflict over ideologies, religions, and things like that. But actually, if you look very closely, almost all of these conflicts are about resources. Dwindling resources, unable to access certain resources. And maybe you can speak a little bit about that, because I think that's very important, that people understand that a lot of the conflicts that we tend to see, it's not as obvious as it looks and what's really driving this. If you look deeper, a lot of times it has to do with resources. And I'm assuming that based on what you're saying, that's going to get a lot worse.
Oh, I think inevitably, because, we're digging out or pumping out the resources faster and faster. That's part of the exponential growth, is we're actually consuming things faster and faster, particularly as, the less developed world wants to try and catch up with the more developed world in terms of what they have. So that's going to be an added increase to consumption. And yes, I think that's been throughout history. Wars have been fought over land, agricultural land, or over sea rights, or whatever it is. I think it's always been underneath, it's been about resources. Or you could say underneath now is not just resources, underneath it all is the impact of accelerating change on resources. I think, again, it's always been there, but now it's becoming more and more obvious. How much is oil behind many of the conflicts in the world? Access to oil, because we're so wedded to oil.
Yeah, I'm wondering, like, as you were saying that, because I was wondering, like, why that is always the narrative that we sold, right? We sold the narrative of it's political, or it's ideological, it's religious. And I think the reason why it gets framed that way is because when you actually talk about the resources and the lack of access to those resources, then you can't avoid the humanity. But when you put forward these other reasons, politics and so forth, then it's almost like we can distance ourselves from other human beings, right? So we lose that empathetic touch, that inside, that empathy that would drive us to want to make positive change for other people. If we just say it's politics, then it's almost a way to kind of distance ourselves from the reality.
Absolutely. And almost maybe sort of cast blame upon one side or the other as well, rather than seeing, this is what happens when things get scarce. This is what happens. We start fighting each other, and it's sad. But maybe, if we look at other creatures, maybe they also, they're after scant resources sometimes, and there's competition that goes on. Maybe it's the fundamental competition in life is access to resources to keep us on an animal level, to keep us alive, but at our level to keep us in the comfortable ways of life we've got used to. Yeah, right. But you're right, it's basically, it's a human issue. We don't want to go without, we don't want to suffer, we don't want to be in pain. This is really the fundamental motivation deep down of all of us. We want to stay comfortable, we want to be content, we don't want to suffer, we don't want to be in pain. And as resources dwindle, then the implication of that is we're not going to have enough, we're going to suffer.
Frank?
This idea of forgiving humanity, that sounds very appealing to me. And I would love to get on board with that. However, I have friends in the activist community who would push back hard on that. And they say, no, there's actual criminals that are conducting what is, in effect, intergenerational genocide. And these people are in fossil fuel companies and other big companies that by no stretch of the imagination should they be forgiven. So how do you balance out those two ideas?
Absolutely. And that misunderstanding, and not inevitable, that misunderstanding comes because I'm not talking about forgiving people or organizations or nations or anything for a lot of the damage or suffering that they've caused. What I'm saying about forgiveness is they may have promoted a lot of the problems we're facing in one way or another, but the acceleration itself has not been caused by human beings, has not been caused by organizations. The acceleration itself is inevitable. And so where we stand today with the impact of the acceleration on the environment is not something that human beings have created. So overall, human beings may have created a lot of the actual problems that are occurring, but they haven't created the overall trend. And different decisions in the past by people, organizations, nations may have led to, different paths we've taken on this journey, but they wouldn't have stopped the acceleration. We would still be facing the price of the acceleration on the environment. So yes, I very much agree with your activists, and I don't want to, reduce responsibility there for any of those people. And people need to take responsibility, and there is blame. We can put blame on them for individual but particular events, how things have turned out, but not for the overall sort of meta crisis that we're facing, which is the crisis of acceleration.
Is that what some people call a emergent property of large complex systems? Is that what the language you use? I've heard that before. And
yes,
sounds like what you're talking about.
It does. I haven't considered that before that point.
Maybe it does. I don't know.
Yeah, but yes, that's interesting. I'd like to sort of think about that a bit, but yes.
So Peter, just a question from my side, because I'm trying to obviously fully understand the thesis. I mean, am I correct in what I'm saying here? If I understood correctly, what you're saying is that any intelligent species that starts creating technology will invariably, regardless, always end up destroying themselves. Is that really the kind of fundamental piece of this?
Yes, I would phrase it slightly differently.
Okay.
Not much destroy, but yes, any intelligent, technologically empowered species will end up on this curve of innovation, furthering more innovation. They will end up on this accelerating curve, and I would say inevitably that's going to start having its cost on people, but economies and on the planet at large. So coming to this state of affairs, I think, is inevitable. How we respond in this state of affairs is, there are still choices here, but I think it's inevitable that they will arrive at this state where they begin to see the technology is growing so fast and the repercussions are growing so fast that in a way, we've reached an unsustainable state.
Because I guess, one of the arguments would be, let's say, for example, we were in the United States and we were talking to somebody who is in favor of being armed, right? And they want to carry a firearm. Their argument would be is that the firearm isn't the problem. It's how the firearm is used, right? So if we juxtapose that to technology, why is it then that technology and the constant innovation is invariably going to lead to the extinction of humanity, potentially? Why can it not be that it does the opposite? And is that not then a case of how that technology is used? I mean, just as an example to that would be, oftentimes, and I've seen this time and time again, something is created, a technological thing is created, and on the face of it, it seems like that would be very good for humanity, but invariably it gets picked up and used as an implement of war. That always seems to be like a default, right? So many of the things that started off as maybe a good idea have ended up being used for the wrong thing. So how much of this problem is actually us as humanity using the technology in the wrong way?
Yeah, this is an important question. And what comes up, as you're saying, is let's just think of the internal combustion engine. So here's a technology which is, it was developed, it's very useful for transport. And, the question is, could we then back then have really had the foresight to see where it leads? I mean, no one actually saw the coming of climate change until the very late 1800s, when a Norwegian started looking at it and saying, hang on, we might start producing CO2 faster than the planet can adapt. But even then, no one took it seriously. So, the question is, could we, way back then, have really limited the use of the internal combustion engine when everybody wants to be able to get around and travel, and it's important, not only for personal travel, but haulage, industry, many other things. so it's almost given human nature, it almost seems inevitable that anything which gives us an advantage like that, improves our comfort, improves our well-being, our access to things, is going to catch on. So, it seems that the consumption of oil looks like it was inevitable it would start growing exponentially. Added to that, industry loves oil. So much of industry is powered by oil behind the scenes. And would industry have voluntarily said, no, we can't do this because it's going to lead to so much CO2 in the atmosphere, it's going to lead to climate change? Could we have had the foresight to limit it? And even if we had the foresight, would we have had the willingness to do it? So, that's just, those sorts of questions come up for me. I mean, even now, we do have the foresight to see where climate change is going, but we don't have the willingness. We don't have, we make many nice statements about, let's keep the temperature below 2 degrees or whatever it is, or 2.5 degrees. And, all the plans that are put in place, when you look at them, are really just hopeless. Okay, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050. By 2030, climate change is going to be far more severe than it is now. Being carbon neutral by 2050 is like, so what? What difference is that going to make? And we're not even really looking like achieving that. So those are sort of questions that come up about, is it inevitable or not?
Yeah, there's two things. Yeah. There's two things that come up for me there. One, somebody asked me this a while back, and what do you think is the biggest problem with humanity? And I said greed. I think is a massive thing. A lot of where we are is because of greed, and unfortunately, we've elevated certain people to have much more power than they deserve, and power over so many resources and people. But it's interesting, like another example of something that we did to solve a problem that seemed like the right thing at the time inevitably became a problem down the road. And I'm thinking about the problem way back when in the United Kingdom, when there were still horses and carriages, and there was horse manure everywhere, and people were getting sick and tired of just having to trample in the horse manure. And so there was this kind of this need, the speed to design a new vehicle, and that became the automobile. And it seemed like a really good thing at the time. It got rid of the horse crap all off the streets, right? And the concern of always the feeding of horses and stabling and so forth. But long term, it ended up being very destructive to the environment.
Yeah. Let's go back to greed, because greed comes up again and again, and it is a major factor. And I think greed, it is partly social conditioning, etc. We put out these ideas, the wealthier we are, the happier we're going to be, the more we have. But I think basically it's a spiritual issue underneath. And I think the sort of spiritual idea that really runs our society is, if you're going to be happy, you've got to have the world be the right way. If you're not happy, there's something wrong in the world, you've got to do something about it. And so this means we think that in order to be happy, we've got to have the right things, do the right things. And I say it's spiritual because I think what all the great teachings point out underneath is that that's a completely upside down way of looking at it, that we, as human beings, our natural state of mind is one of contentment. When everything is okay and there's nothing to worry about, we feel okay. So we don't need to go anywhere or get anything in order to be content. We actually are content when we're not searching for things, when we're not feeling discontent. But our whole culture tells us, no, you can't have this, you've got to have this, you've got to do this. They're fueling discontent the whole time. And that fueling of discontent fuels the idea that I've got to have more, which fuels the whole greed thing. So I think, the greed comes out of living in a materialistic culture. And, our idea of, a spiritually enlightened person or spiritually enlightened societies, we imagine them to be ones where there isn't greed, where people are happy with what they have. So what I'm saying here is greed, yes, greed is a really significant factor in all of this. But in a way, to blame people for being greedy, it's almost like we need to blame the system for being one that actually promotes greed.
Yeah, exactly. And that's been my thesis. That's what I've been writing a lot about, which comes back to what I said earlier. I try to get people to understand that there's nothing inherently wrong with you. The problem is the system, and it's the system that is dictating to you to do certain things and says, if you do this, you will be happy, you will be successful, you will feel contentment. And then you go along and you do all those things and you just feel worse. And then naturally what happens is people go, oh, there must be something wrong with me. I mean, I was even having this conversation with somebody a little while ago. We were talking about psychology and self-help. And I said, isn't it interesting that many of the protocols that have put forward for a person to work through in order to get through whatever they're dealing with is all about normalizing you to be normal in the system.
Yeah.
But there's nothing normal about the system.
Right.
So actually you should be doing the complete opposite. And so what I've been doing just in my own personal practice, I take this approach. Whatever the dominant worldview says I should do to be happy, I just do the complete opposite.
I think that's the wisest thing we can do. Really wise, and it works.
It does. It just doesn't make you popular though, right? So that's the thing, right? So then you're an outsider, you're an outlier, or in the words of in martial arts, you're a Ronin, you know, so you're like this renegade samurai because you're refusing to buy into the status quo, and everybody looks at you as if you're insane. But you're thinking, no, you guys are nuts. You guys are going down this path. Then all you do is complain and moan, even though actually you have everything you need, right, in order to be happy. So that you always, there's exactly what you said. There's always the sense of something's missing. I need to gain that in order to, if I get that, I'll be happy. But that isn't the case. And it's just this constant search. And so obviously technology then feeds into that, right? You know, if I can use technology to get better and be happier, then that's the route I'm going to go. But as we're talking about this, clearly that's not evident. I mean, I think people are now more unhappy than they've ever been in the history of humanity. And we talked to John Vervaeke, and he was talking about a meaning crisis. And it comes back to your point about a spiritual crisis, which is really another way of saying that there's a crisis in meaning.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, just a small point, I wouldn't say, you know, we're unhappier than we've ever been. You know, if we go back to early times where there may have been famines and things like that, you know, we'd have been suffering a lot. We might have, you know, but generally, I think generally, yes.
Yeah, because that's interesting. And myself and Frank have read a lot about this particular thing. And I agree, of course, there's always been hard times for humans on this planet, right? There were famines and so forth. But I think there's if you go back and you look at indigenous people, and especially I was watching a very old documentary about Bushmen who have very little, right? Because they're hunter-gatherers, they move from one place to the next. And they were talking about them as the original affluent society, meaning that, you know, their sense of peace, considering that they, you know, in our view, they have nothing, but actually in their view, they have everything. And I think really what it is, it's about what they place importance on, right? It's because family, community, connection, the deep connection to nature as a living entity, not as some kind of mechanistic machine. And all of those things brings about that sense of meaning for them that we have completely lost.
Right. And that's why I think, you know, I would use the word contentment.
Contentment's a better word. Only reason I use happiness is because that's the general term, right? But you're right.
That's a general term.
I prefer contentment.
Happiness conjures up like something more active. I'm happy about this, happy about that. Whereas contentment is not contentment about anything. It's an inner state. I'm just content. It's a state of not wanting, not needing.
Yeah, I love that. Because, like, you know, oftentimes when I think about happiness to me is fleeting. It's a momentary thing, where contentment is a long-term, right? Meaning that life can be sucky right now and can be really shit, but I can still be content.
Yeah.
I might not be happy, but I'm still content. It's a different thing, right?
Yeah, and what we've been talking about is how our society just promotes discontent everywhere you go. Every single advertisement is ultimately saying you cannot be content as you are. You're missing something. Buy this product, whatever it is, and you will be happier. You will be content. Not realizing they are seeding the discontent to make you do something to try and then do something, find contentment. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's actually intentional. It's called pain marketing. And the idea is that, the consumer has some kind of deficit, some kind of problem, and we'll introduce the magic solution. And if the consumer is not aware of their deficit, then we will create one. We will, put especially in the health and fitness world. I mean, it's put the body beautiful on the cover. You don't have this. This is not you. You've got a problem. We can fix it. And and we're subjected to that all day long, every day.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Maybe we should be glad this civilization's coming to an end. It's so crazy.
I'm not in disagreement there. So Peter, as we kind of come near to the end, what I would like to do is, we have kind of touched on it, but I want to hear from you. Like, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's attempt to be more positive, right? If that's even possible, considering what we were talking about. Let's say we accept everything you've said. What should we be doing? Because obviously there's a sense of people going, well, what's the point, right? I might as well just end myself right now, and just, what's the point of carrying on? I don't think that's what you're saying, right? So,
right.
Yeah.
No, I'm not at all. No. It's a question of how do we carry on? What do we need in these situations? And I think there's a number of things. I've talked about acceptance, and that's the first thing. We're acceptance. Okay, this is what's happening, and through acceptance, I think we have less. We get up. There's not so much to get upset about with acceptance. So then it's like, okay, what do we need? We're going to be facing a world that's, creating unexpected, unpredictable things are going to start happening, and probably some quite distressing things. How do we cope with that internally, first of all? And I think, for me, I'm looking at the more stable I am in myself, which is the more, what we've been talking about, the more I'm not so conditioned into believing that society is going to make me happy, the more I'm be that contentment in myself, means I'm going to be less thrown around psychologically by events. And at the same time, as we're more content in ourselves, I believe we can be more flexible in how we respond to things. So it's like, instead of saying, oh, this is the way we've always done things and I can't do this anymore, it's like, okay, what's the most creative, wise, loving way I can respond in this particular situation, whatever it is? And compassion, I think it's calling for more open-heartedness and compassion. I mean, both for ourselves and what we're going through, but as other people face up to what's happening, as we've said, there's going to be a lot of despair, distress, that sort of thing. And what people need in that situation is compassion in terms of care, love, understanding, help. We're going to need that. And so what I'm saying is, underneath, I think it's really a call for the sort of spiritual conscious awakening that many of us have been calling for a long time, but now not in order to save the world and make everything okay, but to help us navigate these times with wisdom and care and compassion. And the payoff of that is we may actually, start enjoying a more awakened state in the midst of all this, hopefully. But that's what it is for me. And that's, since I've really taken this view seriously, I found I'm more at ease with things, funnily enough. It may seem strange, but I'm not so upset about all the different things that go wrong in the world. Like, oh, this person's doing this is happening. It's like, okay, this is how it is to be going through these times. So that's what I see is what we can do. And of course, that doesn't mean we stop fighting against injustices. There's still lots we can do there, things that are not promoting human happiness, health, whatever, well-being. Of creating suffering, pain. There's still a lot we can do, and a lot of, what you're talking about, the activists. There's so much we can still do there, but maybe we can do it from a calmer state rather than coming at it out of anger.
Yeah.
Nice, nice.
So those are my initial thoughts. Yeah.
Well, I've related idea here. I've got two teachers essentially. One is Greta Thunberg, and of course she is all about panic. I mean, she's all about fear. That's her message: is we need to be more afraid. We need to panic. The house is burning down. And on the other side, I have a friend in Yosemite who is a lifelong climber and became kind of a spiritual teacher. And his point that he comes back to over and over again is people need to stop being so afraid, because that's the root of all this dysfunction is fear. Right. And if we get people to calm down, then we've got a chance. So right. I like to have both those, that polarity between those two people.
Yes, I mean, Greta, yes, we're not panicking enough, but is panic going to be enough? Because panic's, will that really help us, reverse climate change? I don't know. I mean, certainly we're not aware. We're all, I'm talking about the general we are just stumbling blindfold into this. Yeah, and so part of what I think I'm trying to do is actually take off the blindfolds, and maybe we won't be stumbling quite so much.
I was thinking also the idea of fear is that also, again, in this modern worldview, when we talk about compassion, empathy, now that's not to say people don't have that, but generally speaking, I can just, talking from a male perspective, and where I came from, originally South Africa, very patriarchal society, to show any of those would be seen as a weakness. Yeah. So I grew up in a survival mode, where I grew up basically in government housing. I had an abusive alcoholic mother. I always felt and saw things like empathy, compassion. I saw them as something to fear, as a weakness, not as strength. And it took a lot of work on my own trauma in order to come out the other side to realize that actually that is a strength. If anything, that really is what I feel is our superpowers.
Yeah, and you have done that. And what I've heard from Christian is like you have really, you've done that for yourself, and now you're taking it out and giving what you've learned to the world. And there's more and more people like you in various ways who had some awakening and are now sharing it with others. And this is the other side of the whole exponential growth, is we've got a sort of third factor. We've got technology growing, we've got collapse growing, but we've also got this awakening of consciousness growing, because again, it's exponential. The more of us who are waking up like this, the more we can help other people, the more they wake up. And so I see what we're talking about here is something that's also growing exponentially. And we're going to need, more and more people doing what you're doing in the world. And I think this is going to happen, more and more of this. Let's just call you teachers. It's going to be more and more teachers helping people, or guides. I prefer the word guide, actually. Teaching.
Actually, a really good word, guides. It's so interesting that you say that, Peter, because on my site, on my website, where obviously I talk about my work, I refer to myself as a guide, because that's where I see it. That's a good way to describe it.
Yes. And myself. I mean, teaching implies you've got some special knowledge. It doesn't mean that necessarily, but it implies you know something. Whereas I just say, I've had my own journey, and I found bits that have been really helpful for me, and I like to share them with you.
I love that. That's great. Well, thanks, Peter. We want to be respectful of your time, so we're going to let you go. But that was amazing, and I'm sure Frank felt, we got a lot out of that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Lovely. Okay, lovely to meet you both.
Yeah, beautiful to connect with you, Peter. It was fantastic. Appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Cheers, bye.
Cheers.
Hey, Dr. King here. Thank you for joining myself and Frank on an exploration in improving the health of the human animal. To find out more about our work, you can visit Frank at exuberantanimal.com. For coaching with me, gear, and to find out more about the Human Animal Project, as well as my retreats, go to drrodneyking.com. Until next time, be wild, be free.